One more time.
All right, well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the final Republican media availability of the 2025 regular legislative session. Before we start, I just want to take a minute to share, on behalf of House Republicans, our condolences to the late Senator Bill Ramos' family. Senator Ramos served in the State House for, I think, 6 years. I was here the entire time. On a personal note, our districts border each other. He took over representing the fine city of Enumclaw after the latest round of judicial redistricting. Didn't always agree, but he was a good man who dedicated his life to public service and lost him unexpectedly and too young, and we're praying for his family. Moving on to what's going on here in Olympia in the State House for the last couple days of session. The biggest thing by far this week is what is happening with the state budget and taxes. Democrats have engaged in the most reckless taxing spree one could possibly imagine, and I mean that both substantively and procedurally. Substantively, they are taxing the jobs out of Washington. They are passing along giant tax increases to businesses whose presence in Washington State has allowed Washington to become a leader in the nation in terms of K-12 funding, higher ed funding, healthcare funding. Washington State is able to provide an abundant level of services to its vulnerable people because companies like Amazon and Microsoft and Boeing and Starbucks have decided to call Washington home. And the tax policies passed by House Democrats in these last couple of days, and another set of taxes coming on the floor perhaps as soon as today, would devastate the state's economy. But they don't just hit the employers, they hit regular people. These taxes will be passed along to consumers in the form of higher housing prices, higher health care costs. When there is a B&O tax bill on the House floor, I think 2 days ago, Republicans had amendments to exempt taxes that would lead to higher health care costs, higher housing costs. Those amendments were rejected, so these taxes will disrupt the state's economy, make essentials like housing and health care far more expensive, despite Democrats' claim that they're targeting the wealthiest Washingtonians and the biggest businesses. These taxes are going to hit regular people and make regular people pay more for health care and housing at a time of rampant inflation and economic uncertainty. And aside from the substantive problems with Democrats' tax policy, procedurally, it is the worst way imaginable to craft tax policy. Tax policy should be well thought out. It should be fair, uniform, predictable, treat taxpayers evenly, allow businesses to plan. That is not what is happening. We are having, after spending all session talking about, going back before session when Senator Frame accidentally emailed her tax plan to the entire world, we spent all session talking about certain taxes, and then in the last week, Democrats said, forget about those ones, here's a brand new set of taxes nobody has looked at. They are being changed on the fly. There was a meeting, a House Finance Committee meeting yesterday to look at a bill that had passed the Senate. There was a brand new strike-it amendment that completely changed the bill that nobody had seen until a few hours before. And then I got a call last night saying that actually they're going to go back to the Senate version. So tax policy is being changed on the fly. The B&O tax bill the House passed on Monday did not have a fiscal note attached to it when we voted on it off the floor. We have no idea who these taxes are hitting, how much money is raising, how it's going to, who's going to have to pay. This is the worst possible way to do tax policy. The public deserves so much better than what they're getting from legislative Democrats right now. Democrats have given Republicans a couple of hours to come up with suggestions to amend their tax bills, haven't allowed Republicans to see what other changes Democrats are going to include. It is an impossible situation that is entirely the choice / mismanagement of House Democratic leadership, and Washingtonians should be pretty disgusted. And unfortunately, if House Democrats are successful, they'll have to be disgusted through an economy in shambles. Last comment is, even in spite of all of these massive tax increases, we still don't know exactly what's in the budget, which is another huge procedural problem. Legislators are being asked to raise taxes without understanding the necessity for doing so. Nobody's seen the final conference budget yet. Legislators have no idea how necessary these taxes are, how many cuts they're going to stave off, and how many cuts will still be made. And Democrats are continuing to insist that little tiny nickel and dime things that will hurt real people are necessary, even though they're raising taxes by $10 to $15 billion. They cut Medicaid services for postpartum mothers in half to save $5 million. They're raising taxes by $10 billion, and they're looking to cut Medicaid, postpartum mothers off of Medicaid after 6 months instead of after 12 months to save a measly $5 to $10 million. Absolutely unconscionable, and an intentional, reckless decision by Democrats to punish people, to create a culture of fear so that they can ram more taxes down the throats of Washingtonians. That is not a good way to govern. And that is not how Republicans would govern if we were in charge. We would do everything we could to protect Medicaid coverage for postpartum mothers. We would do everything we could to protect children's dental services. That is not what Democrats are doing. They're cutting things they don't need to cut so they can have an excuse to raise taxes on people they don't like, even though the taxes that they're passing, they don't actually know who is going to be taxed or how much, because they're changing them on the fly at the last minute with absolutely no sunlight. With that, I will remind you all that we've got my House Republican Deputy Leader Chris Corey here to answer questions, and then I will turn it over to my Senate counterpart, Republican Leader John Braun.
All right. Well, thanks, Drew. Thank you, everybody, for being here. As Drew said, last media availability of the regular session, perhaps the last one of the year. We'll see. I think it's going to be close. And I certainly would agree with everything that Drew said. He hit on all the topics. I'll hit a couple things. Our priorities: public safety. I think the one note is House Bill 2015 did pass off the House floor as it passed off the Senate floor. Not an ideal bill. There's things I don't like in that, but it is, I believe, or will be a step forward in getting more law enforcement officers on the streets in Washington. So I think that's a win. I think it also will depend on them putting the money in the budget to fund it, and that's not clear yet. So we'll see how that plays out. Because as Drew said, this is now 18 days without having any kind of idea what the budget looks like, and that is frankly unprecedented for the amount of time and the amount of changes we can reasonably expect are happening within that budget. Our best window to what might be happening is the bills we see coming up in Ways and Means, and likely in the same committees in the House, talking about their savings opportunities. That gives us the best window, but by no means a complete window into what they might be doing. On affordability, it's a lot of stuff to talk about, but by far the biggest issue is taxes. And as Drew said, in spite of significant pushback from the governor, they're still talking about anywhere from, I think the full package at its full price was $18.5 billion. That's $13.5 billion, and that's over 4 years, of state taxes. And one thing that is not getting a lot of attention is $5 billion in local taxes. Now, I think that number is down. There's a number of amendments, both in the Senate and the House, that have moved that number down some. But as Drew said, we really don't have an idea how much, because, frankly, they can't keep up with the fiscal notes. It's changing so rapidly in the last few days of session that it's hard to know where it's at. But I don't think it's my best guess is in the maybe $10 billion range, plus plus proportionally local taxes. But I don't know that by any means. But that's the thing, and this isn't, this is what I think, but it's also what the people of the state of Washington, I think, accurately think, if you look at the polls that are out there, that whether it's hitting them directly in the way of a sales tax or a property tax, or if it's hitting them indirectly in the way of a business and occupation tax, they understand that this is going to add to the cost of living here in Washington. There's really no getting around that. So affordability is a big deal. I think we're 100% on the wrong path. And then finally, K-12. I'm kind of a mixed message. I think we're going to get a special education bill out. I worry that and I'm happy to see that. I pushed on special education for a number of years. I don't know what the final price is going to be, and I don't know if it's a price we can truly afford, but I'm glad we're pushing in that direction. That's, I think, the best good news you can say. On the bad news side is the property tax bill, which, as has been pointed out by some of you here, they've taken off the increase in the cap. You know, they from 1% to 3% or 1% of population plus inflation, and remove that section entirely, which I think is a big win for the people of the state of Washington. But our work's not done there because they've rolled out levy equalization or levy policy that adds significant new taxes at the local level. Best estimate right now, it's really hard to predict given the time we've had, about $7.5 billion over the next 10 years. So not a small new property tax, but more importantly, pushes us almost certainly back in the direction of a McCleary decision. And in fact, there's already rumors out there that there's a handful of schools who've already retained an attorney to initiate that type of a suit. And for those who may not remember McCleary, they found that we were not, as required by the Constitution, carrying out our paramount duty and fully funding education because we were over-relying on local levies. And what this bill does is grows local levies immediately by $500 per student, and then at inflation plus CPI for the next 5 years for everybody but Seattle. Seattle grows it just at inflation. So they're going to, within about 6 years, they think they'll be up about $5,000 per child. This is an enormous amount, grows about 60%, almost certainly based on previous patterns from the Democrats. They're not likely to grow state investment in K-12 by anything close to that. So puts us in, in less than 10 years back in a McCleary situation. So we still have a lot of work to do on K-12. It's not only going to have impacts on how K-12 is funded and what might be in front of the legislature in the future. It's doing nothing, in my view, to really get after the true problems in K-12 public education, where we've seen outcomes well below what we would expect. The last thing I would say is I'm going to go back to taxes because I think it's important to recognize this, that much of the damage, whatever plays out in the next 5 days, much of the damage has already been done. We had this huge talk about starting with a wealth tax and a payroll tax and a property tax. Now we're talking about sales tax and a Tesla tax and levies. The signal has been sent to our businesses around the state. They need to have a plan B because Washington is no longer a equitable place to do business, and they're making plans. And I hope it's not true, but we've seen one sign already where the revenue forecast or revenue receipts from for this last month came in about $70 million below projected. And remember, those projections weren't particularly aggressive to begin with, and we beat it. Now, that's one data point, and I certainly acknowledge that. Hopefully, we'll rebound, but I worry very much that we're on a bad and downward trend. And wherever they land in the realm of possibilities, it seems like it's going to be an incredible downward pressure on our state's economy. So with that cheery note, I will stop and just welcome Senator Warnick, who is joining us for the media availability, and ask for your questions.
What are the expectations in terms of the special session? What are the odds that we'll enter into one?
I think they're still about 50-50. I mean, they are on a train track, and I think every indication from what I saw yesterday, they haven't shared this with me, but every indication is they finished the negotiations on the operating budget yesterday, and there's an easy way to tell in the Senate because when they're still doing budget negotiations, they're running on and off the floor to get their votes all the time. They weren't doing that yesterday, so I suspect that they're done with operating budget, and I think the wild card is, of course, we don't know what that looks like and what they spent, and they haven't passed any of the revenue bills yet. So that could go off the tracks, and of course, depending on where they land, the governor has been pretty clear that he is not comfortable with the level of spending they've put forward. So I think, well, my best guess is it's going to run to the end, and it's going to land in the governor's lap, and whatever they have planned and they haven't shared with all of us yet, and the governor's going to have to decide if he thinks that's right for the state of Washington or not, and that's what's going to drive a special session at this point.
And that's what I heard this morning. I was on a call this morning with one of the budget writers. The operating seems to be done, but all three of the budgets are so intertwined this year. We have 19 bills in Ways and Means in the Senate today. They're all tax related. So, but the uncertainty about what the governor's going to do is a key piece, whether we're going to have a special session or not.
Yeah, like I said a second ago, we haven't seen what's in the budget. That definitely means the public hasn't seen what's in the budget, which is a big problem. As far as I know, even rank and file Democrats haven't seen what's in the budget. So I think the two outstanding questions are, what do the last few remaining moderates do? Do they decide to kowtow to their progressive leadership and tax the joy and jobs right out of Washington State? Or do they stand up for what they know is right and say, no, we're not going to go along with this insanity. Let's go back to the drawing board. Or what's the governor going to do? He said that the $12 billion package is too high. If the package still ends up being $12 billion, and like John and I said, it's a little unclear how big the tax package is right now because it keeps changing by the hour. But suppose it ends up about $12 billion. Does Governor Ferguson follow through on his threat, or does he sign it anyway? Or if the legislative Democrats lower that number a little bit, how low does it need to go before Governor Ferguson signs it? To me, if $12 billion is unacceptable, $10 billion is pretty much the same thing. I'd feel awfully silly signing a budget after I made a big deal about how moderate I am and how I'm not going to sign a budget with $12 billion. I'd feel awfully silly if at the end of all that I still signed a budget that was 8 or 9 or 10 billion. I sure hope that when Governor Ferguson says $12 billion is ridiculous, that he knows that 90% of ridiculous is still pretty ridiculous. And so I sure hope that he's willing to stand firm and follow through on the promises he's made as governor to govern responsibly and in the best interest of all of Washington and not just the far left progressive base. And hopefully, even if the tax package ends up coming across at, say, $9 or $10 billion, hopefully Governor Ferguson realizes that's still pretty bad for Washington State and stands firm and vetoes it and makes us come back in with a much more reasonable number that won't be as disruptive to Washington's economy or the cost of living here.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I want to add to that, I know Representative Stokesbury talked about, the moderates over there and what they're going to do, but I wonder what the progressives are going to do here too. I mean, this whole notion around taxes this session was, we are going to make things more progressive. We're going to make taxing more progressive because Washington State is such a regressive state. And I'm looking at this list here, and everything is regressive. We have taxes on Zinn, that's a regressive tax. Increasing Discover Pass fees, regressive. Increasing hunting and fishing licenses, that's regressive. Taxing self-storage facilities, regressive. Transportation revenues that rely on gas tax increases, vehicle registration fees, tire tax increases, sales tax increases, driver's license fees. These are all regressive taxes. And the whole motto of this session, starting from even before we gavelled in, was we need to fix Washington's regressive tax system, and we're doing the exact opposite. We're going to make it more expensive for average Washingtonians in this state. And mind you, with that budget that both Senator Braun and Stokesbury has mentioned, this is relying still on a ton of budget tricks. So we're raising all these revenues, and we're still playing games in the back of the budget to make things work, including, and I think one of the ones that I find the most puzzling is a prepayment. We're going to force businesses across this state to prepay their taxes in a 25th month. If we're budgeting in that regard, we've got some serious problems, and we should be asking ourselves, what the heck are we doing here?
It seems like this year there are more bills than ever that have the emergency clause attached, or am I wrong about that?
183.
Yeah.
183 bills.
Can you expand on that a little more? Because it seems like that was put in place if it was necessary to protect public safety and a few other things that seemed very...
Yeah, and that's true. And we did a little research and found out that there's 183 bills. I don't know if you remember, but one of the first bills the governor signed had an emergency clause on. It was a Democrat bill. He took it off. He said this isn't emergency. So it'll be interesting to see when it gets down to the signing. We've tried to get those emergency clauses off with amendments, but they're not interested. Everything's an emergency this year. Create this culture of fear. So we'll see what the governor does with those.
I actually think in a lot of cases the emergency clause is intentionally put on there to prevent a referendum. I think that is highly offensive to voters in this state. They have a constitutional right to referendum. The emergency clause should be very limited in focus. Obviously, I was pleased with Governor Ferguson's line item vetoing that of the emergency clause, and we are going to make sure we highlight all of these. None of them are a true emergency and can wait the 90 days to go into effect after the governor signs them, or be subject to a referendum of the people. That's the only respectful thing we can do is remove those, and clearly none of this stuff is an actual emergency that needs to be done today.
Can I follow up on what you were just talking about? You mentioned the transportation revenue package. I know that transportation budget is typically pretty bipartisan, and I'm curious, with the revenue changes, including the gas tax and other fees that you mentioned, how much support or opposition do you anticipate to the transportation budget if it does include all of this revenue that looks like it'll be included?
Well, just speaking to the House side only, I think my Republican colleagues and I are going to be locked in opposition. We don't think that all these taxes are unnecessary. We haven't actually sat down and vote counted anything yet, but the message we've been getting all along from a lot of our members on transportation and then around discussions is this is the wrong direction to move a transportation package forward.
If I could just kind of briefly augment that, yeah, I think Chris is right. I doubt there will be any Republican votes for the package on our side from the House. Although I will point out and give some credit, excuse me, some credit words to that Chair Fye has been a good partner in all of this and has been open with our ranking member, Representative Barkas, in terms of how things were shaping up on both the spending and the revenue side. Routinely sought Representative Barkas's input. That is the model for how we should do things. Chair Fye doesn't have to do that. Democrats have enough votes to pass a tax package and a budget on their own, but he recognizes that our transportation system throughout Washington is connected, and the budget will be a better product if Republican voices are listened to and incorporated. That stands in stark contrast to how Chair Ormsby has handled the operating budget, which is to completely lock out Republicans year after year after year, and it ends up with a much worse product. So while Republicans in the House are almost certainly going to be a no vote on the transportation revenue package, I think we do appreciate Chair Fye's partnership and willing to engage in good faith dialogue, and really respect him for that.
Can I just clarify that you were making this differentiation? The budget itself, and there's a bond bill, you're not locked up against the budget, just the revenue side, right? You guys, because, I mean, it was introduced as the chair and the ranking member's resource plan and budget. I just wonder, are you locking up?
In the House, I don't believe that the resource package was introduced as the chair and the ranking members. In the House, I think it was only the chair's resource package.
Just on the budget part, which is separate. Where are you guys on that?
That one is a little more nuanced because, on the one hand, we appreciate Chair Fye's working with us to understand which projects are sort of highest priority. On the other hand, we recognize there's a little bit of structural unfairness to be voting for a budget that's relying on revenue that we don't support. So we're trying to navigate that in a respectful way. So waiting for the final thing to understand how much new revenue, what projects are where, and how that, to the extent to which it relies on new revenue in this current spending period, that is TBD. But I think the opposition, even if there's no votes on the spending plan, I think that's just a practical recognition of feeling bad supporting a spending plan for which we didn't support the taxing portion of.
So you'll be voting to spend the money, just not raise.
Well, again, I'm not sure if we're going to be voting to spend the money or not. We'll have to discuss, and it's more nuanced, but
TBD.
But my point is, no votes on the spending plan, I think, aren't an indictment of Chair Fye's handling of the budget.
lots more, but I'll let
Got it.
I just took a whole.
I'll ask another question unless somebody has, okay, kind of a little bit off, but the WIAA decision this week to continue to allow boys and girls sports and go along with OSPI. As you're, I'm sure, aware, there's multiple complaints that have been filed against Chris Rachel's office, and then the threat of U.S. Department of Justice any day announcing an investigation into the state, and the threat to withhold billions from funding. I mean, that could throw a huge monkey wrench into things. Any
I would love to address that. I had a bill regarding it, couldn't get a hearing. I have a resolution honoring girls in sports. I can't get that to be read on the floor of the Senate. They wanted to do it during pro forma. We ran out of pro forma because it's too controversial to run that resolution in a regular session. We've done other semi-controversial resolutions this year. I'm the mother of 3 daughters who were in sports. I want to see fairness in sports, and I was really disappointed that WIAA didn't come through with a good vote. I mean, it would have been advisory anyhow, but I'm just very disappointed in what's happening with the school districts, OSPI. I'm part of the Title IX generation when we, brought women's sports to the forefront, and it's just extremely disappointing that we can't get a good resolution or a good option for girls, especially in high school sports. There's no reason that they should have competition that are not female. So.
Yeah, one of the complaints filed is from a family in my district, and I have let them know that I fully support that decision, and I think that's something that is worth standing up for. This is in my opinion, a hill to die on. I too am a father of 2 daughters, one of whom is an active sports competitor now, and I would assume, given her mother's genes, my 1-year-old will be the same. They deserve this. There was a huge fight over Title IX, and we're just basically erasing it now. I understand the tough spot the WIAA is in. I have less sympathy for OSPI for digging in their heels. This is the same OSPI director who, is now complaining about the potential withholding of funds, but is just as willing to do that when people don't do what he wants. So if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. I'm glad parents are standing up and saying no. I think this is a moral issue. It's not, to belittle anyone who's going through gender dysphoria or whatever, but women should play in women's sports and have their own protected spaces. That was what the fight was over, and allowing men to be in there is just unconscionable, in my opinion.
And it's a matter of safety, not just competitiveness, but safety. Some girls have been injured by a trans athlete because of the extra strength that they have. So I'm going to continue to fight with Rep. Corey on this, and all of us. So.
Father of 3 daughters, all of them involved in sports. I think this, to paraphrase Governor Newsom, this is deeply unfair what we're doing. We need to think harder about how we approach it. It is a complicated issue, but they're trying to solve it on the easy way, rather than make sure it's fair for all women and girls. And I would go back to something Representative Stokes said earlier. It seems to be kind of an assault on women this year. We heard them. They're going to cut maternal care for women in Washington State. Look, 48 out of 50 states in our country have a year of coverage. We're going to cut Washington to 6 months. That should be unconscionable.
Can I go back to Representative Stokesbury? Your phone call you mentioned on Tuesday? Tell us some more about that. Was that the only bill we thought? Are there other tax bills coming up?
I'm sorry, you said a phone call?
You said you got a call Tuesday or yesterday.
Yeah.
Bring back the Senate.
Yeah, so, not to sort of repeat Schoolhouse Rocks, but when the Senate sends a bill over to the House, it goes through our committees, and the committee will adopt amendments. And so in the Finance Committee that met to consider the bill, there's a lot of things. The main thing I think is some sales tax on certain service categories. It also has it has a 95% tax on Zyn, which would make Zyn more highly taxed than cigarettes, which is just kind of insane. If you want to get people to stop smoking, you should encourage them to pivot to less harmful activities like Zyn. But that aside, the bill came over to the House Finance Committee. It was up for executive session yesterday morning. There was a last-minute striking amendment that changed a big portion of what was in the bill that passed the Senate. And so then when it passed out of committee yesterday, presumably coming to the floor in the next day or so, the thought would be, okay, now we have the committee amendments before us. Now let's continue to propose amendments to what passed the committee. I found out late last night that is not actually the plan the Democrats intend to do. Rather than bring up the committee version on the floor for potential amendments and a vote, they are instead ignoring the committee version and all the changes made in committee, and instead bringing up the bill as it passed the Senate. And it sort of makes you wonder what the purpose of
I guess that's wrong.
all these committee meetings are for. If the Democrats just think it's all kabuki theater and it doesn't really matter, it's just for show, and it's a pretty pathetic show when they give the public a few hours notice. But that's what I was referring to.
I guess I'm trying to figure out what else was learned in that late night conversation about other tax bills, or was that the only one?
Just that the majority will bring to the floor the bill as it passed the Senate rather than the bill as it passed out of the Finance Committee.
I'll remind you, the Senate added things to that bill that had never seen a hearing before. They just added them on the floor, in particular on tobacco and nicotine products that had never really been vetted by the public. Whether they're good or bad, I won't weigh in on, but they certainly deserve to be vetted by the committee process.
Can you expand on those a little bit? Like what exactly?
So they did a number of things. They added taxes. You mentioned Zen. They changed that, and they also addressed the cigarette tax. There's one other change. I'm drawing a blank all of a sudden.
Self-storage.
What's that?
I think self-storage.
Yeah, self-storage came in on the floor. There's a number of things that they, again, not weighing in on the merit one way or the other, just that they seem like those could have been addressed during the committee process or come out of bills that at least had a hearing. They seem to be sort of shooting from the hip instead of letting the process work its way through. And I think that's all actually stems from the idea that they purposely waited as late in session as they could to introduce their tax packages. If you go back only a few weeks now, you remember it was the first we saw of their original tax packages. They hadn't talked about them for the first 10 weeks of session. They drove it in the last 5 weeks. When those didn't go over well, they're driving it in the last week to make more and more changes. And so we literally don't have a good idea what's going to be in front of us the next time we vote, and we have no idea what the fiscal impact is to the state or to our citizens.
And I pointed out at the beginning, sort of like how haphazard the Democrats' procedural approaches to these tax policy changes are, and how last minute they are, and how much it's lacking any degree of sunlight. That's probably most concerning with regard to this bill that we're talking about, that Jerry just asked this question about, that the bulk of that bill is sales tax on certain service categories. And those kinds of changes can be really impactful to Washington and really deserve a much more robust public debate and examination by legislators. Some of the categories that would be subject to tax under the bill as introduced, it was a tax on temporary staffing services, so making providers of temporary staffing services collect and remit sales tax. Providers of custom software have to collect and remit sales taxes. And so you might look at that on paper and say, well, okay, who cares if a temp agency has to collect and remit sales tax? What even is custom software, and does that just mean that like Microsoft has to pay a little bit more sales tax? Maybe people are okay with that. That's not where the incidence of these taxes are falling. healthcare, hospitals, healthcare providers are huge consumers of temporary staffing services because they need to make sure their hospitals are fully staffed. So every time they hire a traveling nurse to make sure that a shift is covered or a ward is covered, they hire those through a staffing agency. The amount of custom software that is involved in the healthcare industry to ensure that patients have up-to-date records that are kept confidential is astronomical. So while it is a temporary staffing agency or a technology company that might be the ones collecting and paying the tax to DOR, they're collecting it from other businesses in the economy, and they will be the ones that ultimately have to pay and bear the incidence of that tax, and that will be hugely disruptive. So when we talk about not wanting to raise healthcare prices, a sales tax on custom software and a sales tax on temporary staffing services, that will rise the price of healthcare. But these are being jammed through with 1 week, and nobody even realizes that because there hasn't been time for a proper public hearing, time for the affected businesses and organizations to come in and meet with legislators and explain to them, hey, we ran the numbers. Here's how much money that we would have to pay if there's a sales tax on custom software or a sales tax on temporary staffing services. So, we have hospitals that are really, really, really struggling, and the collective bill from just these changes in sales taxes would mean several $100 million of extra taxes just paid by the state's hospitals. And that's just the hospitals. That doesn't include the nursing homes, the long-term care facilities, the independent physician clinics. And that doesn't include, other sectors like housing and like food and groceries. So huge problems arise when you are passing taxes in the dead of night with no notice and no opportunity for individuals to come share with the legislature how these taxes are going to disrupt their business and, increase the prices of things like healthcare, housing, and food. And really wish House Democrats would be taking a more honest and open approach that isn't going to hurt Washingtonians.
The other item that happened on the floor of the Senate was to add the tax for the credit unions. The tax for the credit unions. That's the other one that happened on this big change on the floor of the Senate without any discussion. Again, not weighing in on the value of the policy. That's a huge change in our banking and credit union industry. Happened right on the floor of the Senate without any hearing at all.
Drew Mickelson of King 5, who couldn't be here today, submitted a question. What will you be watching in the final days of the session? What's your biggest, most realistic fear?
I think we've already covered that. I think for me at least, is that the Democrats continue to walk into this unprecedented array of taxes, and it's going to have a long-term and detrimental impact on our economy that we're going to struggle. This isn't going to. This is, if you believe this solves this year's problem, it's going to create much worse problems in the future. And we know that that there is certainly uncertainty in our economy because of other things going on in the world. Why would we want to set ourselves up for additional uncertainty by layering? We don't know the number. Somewhere between $8 and $15 billion of new taxes on our economy without thinking it through. So I think that's a very real threat. I think it'll have very real negative impact on our economy, and we should be appropriately cautious. And this idea that we're going to jam this through in the next 5 days when we're not sure, I think is wrong-headed. Much smarter to slow down, take a few extra days if we need a few extra days to get this at least better, if not perfect, at least better than it is right now.
Yeah, my biggest fear, very similar. I mean, it's that the far left is going to lead House Democrats down a path with their leadership doing things in the dead of night and without being fully open and transparent, even with their own members, much less the public, that will result in the passage of record-setting taxes and spending that both wreck the state's economy and make the price of health care, housing, and food more expensive for ordinary Washingtonians. And that is the exact path we've been going down, and we've got a few days left for the governor or some reasonable Democrats to realize that they don't have to finish all the way down the path, that we can start over and come up with a budget that doesn't disrupt the economy and doesn't hurt vulnerable people.
And I'd like to add, at the very beginning of session, or just prior to session, there was an email that went out, and it was talking points from the Democrats in the Senate to look at businesses being villains. I don't know if you saw that, but talk about the villains of the employers, the large employers, the large businesses. I'm afraid the tide has turned that now we are the villains, we being collective in the legislature, because of these tax proposals. People don't see their best interest being addressed with the bills that we've proposed. Or that have been proposed. I keep saying we, but it's not these people at the table. But we're not endearing ourselves to the people that we should be serving. That's my biggest fear, that we are creating a hostile environment, if you will, by the people that we should be serving. And I want to take care of the vulnerable just like everybody else. But these taxes, and we had a hearing just within hours last week in the Ways and Means. We had 26,000 people sign up within hours. That's the beauty of the being able to sign up online. 98% were opposed to these taxes. So we're not listening to the people that are out there that would be impacted by these. That's what my fear is.
Yeah, I agree with the senator. I think some of the legislature is listening to a very small subset that is pushing a very radical agenda that is not indicative of where the state is as a whole. And my biggest fear is we just continue to drive people and businesses out. Ever since I've gotten here, I get those messages a couple times a year from people. They're like, I can't take this anymore. We're going to move. And my comment is, don't leave. Stay and fight. The state is worth it. I'm here because of my kids, and hopefully their grandkids can, live in a Washington that I have known and loved. But it's becoming harder and harder to defend that sometimes. And I get, in addition to those messages, I get messages from people with info on certain bills, and they're like, this can't be real, right? A lot of people send me stuff that they're seeing, and they're like, please tell me where this is wrong. Like, this has got to be some sort of misunderstanding. And I'll go through it, and I'm like, nope, that's right. That's what we're doing this year. And the disconnect, I think, between where the average Washingtonian is, whether they're in, suburban or urban Seattle or rural Washington, I think that is going to continue to create problems down the road, and that really concerns me as a legislator who, obviously I live in Eastern Washington, love Eastern Washington, went to high school and college in Western Washington. I know the beauty and the majesty of this state, both in terms of its environment and its business and people climate, and we're really tearing threads through that fabric, and that really concerns me.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.